So thank you all so much. So I was laughing when Bobby in the last session said, you know, he had to remind himself not to allow himself to be scheduled right after really great speakers. And I was thinking about that. So note to self, don't let Mary Hinton schedule you at the end of a day after one after another really substantive, interesting, fabulous speakers, and then be the panel that's standing between you and a cocktail hour. But we're gonna forge ahead. And I'm very, very excited to be moderating this session with 3 additional really brilliant, insightful people who can add to what has already been, I think, an amazing day of really searching and important conversation. And so I want to personally thank President Hinton and President Hemeseth for bringing us all together and for giving us this context to really tackle the tough issues and be really honest with ourselves about both what we really value and also where we need to go next. And we're going to do this session in a similar way to some of the others. We're not going to do really formal presentations at all, but I am going to pose some questions to my colleagues up here, and then we're going to have lots of time for you all to pose questions as well. You do have bios in the program, but I do want to just say a word or two about these very smart people that I'm going to get to talk to now, and you will get to talk to as well. So to my right is Eric Blackhurst, who is the Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees of Alma College. He also is the Assistant General Counsel of the Dow Chemical Company. And he's just been telling me about an amazing career that has taken him all over the world in different roles at Dow. He has a bachelor's degree from Alma College as well as a law degree from the University of Kentucky. Now, many people in this room probably already know Georgia Nugent, to my left. She is serving as a senior fellow right now for the Council of Independent Colleges, but many of you know she served as president of Kenyon College for 10 years, from 2003 to 2013, and she has just wrapped up a year as the interim president of the College of Wooster. She also served in a series of positions at Princeton University and at Brown University. She has her bachelor's degree from Princeton and a doctorate from Cornell. All the way to my left is Steve Poskanzer, the president of Carleton College. He is Carleton's 11th president and has been so since 2010. One thing that I think will be useful for you to know is, in addition to his role as an academic leader, he's also a scholar of higher education and higher education law, and his research focuses on issues of academic freedom, which is obviously an issue that is very much on a lot of our minds right now. He also has worked at the University of Pennsylvania, University of Chicago, the SUNY system, and he was president of SUNY New Paltz. And he has his undergraduate degree also from Princeton, a little Princeton gathering here, and a law degree from Harvard University. So I want to just frame this session. We've obviously been talking all day about what makes liberal education and liberal arts so important, how it works now, how it could work better, and what the current context is in which we're trying to make it work, not only for traditional students, but for the current students we have and the students we want going forward and need to educate going forward. And in many ways, I think one of the things that we wanted to do with this panel was to really push ourselves to think about that context, but also really move it out and really think far out, 30 years, 50 years. And I was thinking that only a group of people so dedicated to the liberal arts would produce a session where we were referencing from last night Melville and Homer, and then this morning we had Darwin, And then we also jumped to Billy Joel and to Guns N' Roses. And so I want to begin by referencing another great American or Canadian philosopher, Wayne Gretzky, who had this famous, people asked him about what made him so successful, and he always said, well, he would skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is, right? And lots of management people use that phrase, right, to think about how do you do that as a leader, right? How do you think about where my institution is headed, not where it is? And leadership is in some ways all about that. So the other thing that I think is interesting, I didn't actually title this session. I don't know who did, but it was smart and interesting, probably Mary. And one of the things that was interesting about it when we had our planning call for this session was it doesn't say, it's a question, for one thing, what makes the liberal arts essential for the next 50 years? But it's also not phrased, will the liberal arts be essential for the next 50 years? It says, what is going to make it essential, assuming that it is, and it will be. So it's a very optimistic panel. And it obviously assumes a lot of the things that we talked about earlier today and that we saw some research on, that this approach to education is essential because it works in various ways for students. And I suspect everyone in this room has that optimistic sensibility, at least in part of ourselves. But we also know that a lot of commentators outside of this room are not so optimistic and don't share our confidence about how essential this kind of education is. So I want to begin asking each of the panelists to reflect a little bit from where you sit as an academic leader, as someone who's helping an institution think about the future and where they're headed. What makes you optimistic about the future of liberal arts education? And what makes you pessimistic about the future of liberal arts education? And maybe we'll start with you, Stephen, and
Okay.
come right down.
Great. Well, it's a privilege to be on a panel with three people who I admire so much, and great to be here. You know, I like your hockey metaphor, very Minnesotan, okay?
Right, there you go.
I'm a big hockey fan, and I'm actually obsessed with hockey goalies, okay? So the obvious question about where the puck is headed is it's headed towards me in my net, right?
Nobody's not going to take out your teeth.
That's okay. No, I will channel my inner Patrick Waugh while we do this. So there are things that I do think make me optimistic, and there are things that make me pessimistic. On the optimistic side of the ledger, I still think there is very continued robust demand for the education that we provide from students, prospective students and their families, and also from employers. I think that strong, really good, and really distinctive liberal arts colleges are continuing to see robust demand. There are many places where applications are going up from year to year, and places that aren't should be looking at what places that are seeing that happen can be doing to make sure that the same thing potentially happens at their institutions. So I do think that there are significant numbers of students, both domestic and international students, who still greatly value the type of education that we provide. So that makes me optimistic. But I'm maybe even more fundamentally optimistic based on what I hear and what the data show us from employers. When you ask them what it is they are looking for in new hires, what are the skills, the qualities, the characteristics of individuals who succeed in their businesses, their companies, or their graduate programs, it is consistently exactly what we provide. It is critical thinking. It is the ability to write well. It is teamwork skills and working well with others. It is nimble and flexible minds and the capacity to leap and make connections between different fields or to think capaciously and in original ways. That's what we do. And that's what we do, and I believe do better than many other sectors of higher education. And that's what employers and the world needs. And so to my mind, that is a reason for very considerable optimism. I also think at a very fundamental level, we should take heart in the fact that the world does need more people who are liberally educated in this way, not just for employment reasons, but the types of citizens and the types of just self-engaged and driven and thoughtful individuals. That is what we are in the business of producing and providing. And we're never going to be the sector that educates the largest piece of the educational pot. That is not what we try and do. But the sector of what we do can and I think will continue to be really robust. So for me, those are all reasons to be optimistic. I'm happy to talk about what keeps me awake at night on the pessimism side, but maybe I should let some of my colleagues talk about what makes them optimistic as well.
Okay, fair enough.
So I was actually optimistic until I heard Charlie and Kathy this morning. Now I feel different. No, I think even that they too, in the end of their presentation, came around to some of the same reasons that make me optimistic. And Debra mentioned Andy yesterday referencing Homer, and I am a classicist by trade, so I will probably mention Homer too. And part of the reason for my optimism is that I think, I think in many ways the big questions don't change. And we see those persisting across millennia. And so the issues that are wrestled with in the Iliad they look differently today, but they are in many ways the same issues. In that opening scene in the challenge between Achilles and Agamemnon, it might as well be a corporate boardroom and a takeover, So part of what makes me optimistic is I think that we really do have in liberal education a kind of bedrock of fundamental human questions that will always remain relevant. And we don't have all the answers to those, obviously, but we have, I think, valuable ways of asking the questions and helping our students to ask the questions. So in that way, I suppose I'm circling around again to some things that Andy said yesterday about finding and making meaning in your life. So on the one hand, I see this kind of continuity of the aspects of human nature that we deal with. On the other hand, we obviously are living in a time of tremendous change. And therein, I find a really strange irony that we confront in liberal arts education. And that is, we've alluded to some of these things already. We are in an environment of incredible change, for example, in professional life. So we know that our students are going to change not only jobs, but careers. All of us have heard this. They are going to need to be nimble and flexible and able to learn throughout the rest of their lives. Those are things that we believe we specialize in. And so the irony for me is the terrible disconnect between the opportunity of that kind of education and the lack of understanding of what it can provide. I also, and here I'll get on a bit of a personal hobby horse for a moment, and a couple of you, I know John has heard me on this hobby horse before. We are also facing incredible change. Again, we've spoken earlier in this conference about the advancement of science, the development of science and the possibilities that it makes possible, that it gives us, the capabilities that it gives us. And I find, again, a terrible irony in the fact that our technologies and our sciences offer us the means to alter our environment, to alter the very nature of being, of whether human beings or other kinds of entities in our world. And yet we are not concerned about teaching the ethical understanding that inherently needs to go along with that. So we all want to be global, but we don't need languages anymore. We all want to be on the cutting edge of technology, but somehow we're not going to need philosophy and religion and history to help us understand how to deploy those technologies. So I'm optimistic, but I think we confront some really interesting ironies. And I guess I would say I think that the onus is on us to show, and we'll come back to that theme, I think, show why what we have to offer is of value in this contemporary world as well as it has been for generations.
What makes you optimistic and pessimistic?
Oh, I get to do both.
Why don't you do both and then we'll come back.
Great. On the optimism side, and I am very optimistic about liberal arts education and what we have to offer. It comes directly from my own sort of everyday experience, which is in the context of my work life, I need integrators, okay? I need people who can synthesize information. I have lots of expertise. I have enormous ability to draw on experts from every single discipline, but what I don't have enough of are people who can see around corners, people who are maze bright, people who can predict the future with just a minimal amount of information and do so quickly, okay? We don't have all day or all night or weeks or months or years often. We need to make decisions based on 80% of the information, and we need to be able to do so in an integrated way. I have lots of accountants at my disposal when I work on transactions, and I have experts in every single field that you can imagine. But what I don't have enough of are people that can take that, synthesize it, summarize it, present it to the rest of the organization and the decision makers, and reach a conclusion. And also go ahead and measure risk in a way that you can go ahead and manage and act upon. I think liberal arts does that better than any other kind of education. We also, I think, do a terrific job of educating people about other cultures and the context in which you're going to need to do business. So I think there's just every reason in the world for the liberal education to be valued, and we seek it in my world. I am much less optimistic. In fact, I'm pessimistic about the actual survival of the institutions that present it. And when I say that is, if we go out 50 years, I very much doubt that the number and proliferation of small colleges that we have today is going to exist. I'm very optimistic that we will be delivering education to these folks and liberal arts education, but it will not be in the way that we do it today, in any shape or form that we do it today, I don't believe. The world is full of stakeholders who are looking for us to work well together. The world is no longer an independent place in which we can stand alone. We have to integrate what we do. We have to go ahead and collaborate. And that's an easy word to say, but what I really mean by that is we should be doing collaborations with high schools. We should be doing it with community colleges. We should be doing it with private sector. We should be doing it with the government. You should be failing fast. You should have lots of lures out there in the stream trying to catch, and maybe 1 in 10 will hit. But you've got to be able to do that quickly. Those are the kinds of things that have to happen, and I just believe that we need to start actually implementing what we teach. It's humorous to me because in the context of me being a trustee on a board, when we have a problem at Alma College, and I tease my president about this, but we have a significant issue, he says to us, well, we're going to do a book study on that. And then I said, well, when are we going to fix it? And he said, well, we might be able to do something about it by the fall of 2018. The world won't do that. There will be winners that learn and know how to be nimble, how to be fast, how to solve problems in weeks, not years, not months, but weeks. And those are the kinds of things that this group can do. I'm very optimistic that this group is the kind of people. I mean, you took a risk. You came here. Think of all your colleagues who are back there who didn't take a risk to even come here. But those are the kinds of things that need to happen, is we need to go ahead and be quicker to fail, try more things, and stop doing some things. All right? We need to be able to get into our lexicon things like no. Okay? It's going to end. All right? This needs to end now. Because adding on and just innovating and adding on isn't going to get us across the goal line. So I believe there's going to be winners. They're going to be there to deliver the education. And so I believe that the liberal arts education is going to be very strong in the future, but it will be provided by people who know how to be more nimble and just better at delivering that education.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot to chew on in all of that. And of course, we started the day, interestingly, with exactly some of these conundrums, which is it is in our DNA in a liberal arts college to try to provide this kind of education and these kinds of outcomes. But we're not the only ones talking to employers, and there are lots of institutions that don't look like us that are in fact delivering, at least to some of their students, these outcomes, and may in fact be doing it in more innovative, nimble sorts of ways. So where does that leave us in terms of optimism or pessimism as leaders of institutions, Georgia and Steve, if you could talk a little bit about, is this a source of pessimism, or is this just fuel for you helping catalyze innovation on your campuses? Is that how you think about that, or that challenge?
I'll pick this up.
Go first. Sure. Okay.
Because I was thinking about this. With the optimism and pessimism questions, I'm kind of thinking at the global level, and I think we'll come around to more specifics about how do we deliver this, how do we make change, and so forth. The pessimistic side of my earlier optimism is, as I alluded to, I think these truths are not self-evident to our audience, to our public. And I think that we really, so I guess this is still being optimistic in a way. I think we really need to find ways to move off of the defensive position into a different kind of position. I'm not going to call it offensive because that doesn't sound right. And I take very seriously what somebody articulated this morning. It might have been Charlie, I can't remember. Evidence matters. To our publics, evidence does matter. Can we show that we actually have the value that we add the value and that we can demonstrate the value? Here's where I have some divergence from much of what is going on in our context today. And that is that I absolutely believe that evidence matters, but I don't believe that data is the only kind of evidence. And I think as folks engaged in liberal arts education, we need to be more active about that. One, I like to draw the parallel. I was having some conversations during the course of last night and today where people would say, yeah, we need to find better ways of measuring that. I guess I really want to be Einsteinian and say not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And when I think about if we believe that we are not just in the information business, but in the knowledge, that we are hoping to produce something closer to knowledge than to mere information, then I really want to say that I don't believe we can measure knowledge any more than we can measure your success in friendship or love or parenting or faith. I think there are irreducible human things that cannot be measured, and our effort to measure everything, to me, is going in the wrong direction. Rather, I think we have to find ways to tell the story of our lives. And our lives are not narrated by graphs and bar charts. They just aren't. And we have not been as successful at that. We haven't even tried. For many years, we just assumed that everybody understood our story and everybody understood the value. Well, they don't. And so we need evangelists out there. And those evangelists are legion. They are our alumni. Their stories are not just anecdotes, they're the truth. And we need to find ways to mobilize that, to show that evidence, I think. So that's pessimistic and optimistic.
Well, pick up your thread of pessimism that actually turns into optimism. I think that some of the challenges that we face are of our own making. So they're sins of commission on our part. I think it is way too easy, and we fall into the trap all the time of talking about the value of what we do in terms of dollars and cents terms and starting salaries, and that's on us. That's our fault, and we shouldn't play into that narrative. I also think that there are ways in which we follow pricing models, and there are individually rational but ultimately destructive ways of offering what we do. And don't get me on my Merit 8 horse, but that's a great example of something that I think we need to get away from.
Came up earlier.
Okay, right. So those are sins of commission on our part. And I think there are sins of omission as well that are, but see, if they're things that we do or things that we're not doing, I'm ultimately optimistic because you can stop doing the stupid things and you can start to do things better. So the sins of omission are things like, this goes back to the data that George is just talking about. You're right, and Einstein's right, you can't measure everything, but there are things that we could try and measure that would be very difficult social science that might take decades to do well, but that we ought to be trying to do. And I don't think narratives will be enough because I think we live in a cynical, show-me data world, and I don't think that's going to go away. But there are ways to demonstrate that people that graduate from liberal arts colleges are in fact more engaged citizens, that they are in fact more involved and more intellectually curious. And if those things aren't true, then that's on us, okay? Then that's a sin of both omission and commission, and we should worry about that. But I think that there are ways to make the case more strongly and stop acting stupidly and stop falling into traps of other people's arguments that are meant to support a different type of education that we do. And if we do that right, I actually become optimistic about where we go.
So I want to do a callback to this session, I can't remember when it was earlier today, in which Chris Farrell pointed out that one of the contexts in which we work is one of great pessimism on the part of the general public about institutions in general in our society, and especially about a narrative, not necessarily only about liberal arts colleges, but a narrative about college as the route to opportunity in America. I mean, it's a narrative that we talk about, but there is great cynicism about it right now for a lot of economic reasons that we heard about earlier today. And I was thinking about a data point, that I heard a number of years ago. I know, you didn't say all data was bad. That is a context for this. So there was this public agenda survey that they did, and it was a while ago, it was in 2010. And they found that nearly 2/3 of the public agreed with the following statement: colleges and universities are like most businesses and are focused more on the bottom line than on providing a good educational experience to students. 2/3 of the public said they agreed with that statement. And that number had jumped in, I believe, a 3-year period, 8 points. And my guess is that today it might even be higher than that. And it goes back to the conversation we were having earlier about, it's not about what we're actually doing, but it is about how the current context has changed and how opaque some of our practices are, especially around the business model of this kind of education. So I wonder if any of you, this is directed to whoever wants to jump in here, 2 questions. One, how do we shift that skepticism and cynicism, or how do we contribute to changing that in an environment where a lot of institutions are facing that challenge? And second, what is it about our business practices that we can change to help people see? I mean, when I read that, of course, I have like this amazing job because I get to work with all the institutions out there that want to change, want to understand better whether we really are fulfilling our mission. And when I go to those places, I also work with all the change agents on the campuses, the ones who really do want to do the work. So I work with people who every day are thinking about how do we provide a good educational experience. So it's literally the opposite of what this statement is. So I'm not saying that I agree with it, but I do believe that this cynicism is out there. So how do we tell our story, and how do we change our practices to help influence that?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I've got to agree with what, I don't see John right now, but with what John said this morning. This is crazy when you can't give an answer to how much does it cost. That's nuts. No wonder the public is skeptical about that. We have got to find a way to fix that.
You start with transparency and accountability, and embrace the fact that the accountability demands are not going to go away, and we shouldn't be fearful of them, and we need to be transparent about where we spend money and what we spend it on, and we better make smart decisions that are defensible based on our values.
Do you want to add anything? You don't
No.
have- Okay.
I'd say,
That's fine.
I'd say
Well, I
one
will
other
add
thing.
something. We do need to become more businesslike. Despite everybody thinking we are, we aren't. We are not business enough. So you're getting all the rap for being too businesslike, and you're not getting any of the benefits of being businesslike. So you might as well do it. Okay?
Excellent point. I also think, I mean, we're undoubtedly in an environment where all institutions, and even we're getting to the point where all expertise is mistrusted and so forth. But I have to say, and I say this not happily, at least my experience in the small liberal arts colleges has been that we really are, and again, I'm hearkening back to Andy, I guess, last night, that we really are paying too little attention to the fact that our students are going to go out into the world to be citizens, to be bankers, to be entrepreneurs, to be who knows what. And I've been really kind of shocked by how many of our faculty believe that they are only creating clones of themselves to be academics. We have got to change that perception.
I think that's right, but this is a classic example of your strengths or your weaknesses. So if you do things right at your college or university and you forge the close faculty-student bonds that we want, and you have faculty who genuinely care about their students in good ways, it's only natural that faculty members who adore these students would dream that someday these individuals who they've mentored would want to do and grow up just like them, right? There's nothing wrong or bad with that, okay? But the silver lining in this is if you teach and empower the students to be able to say to the faculty, what I dream of is being a United States Senator. What I dream of is starting my own NGO. What I dream of is going to Stanford Business School. Okay, the faculty that really care about the students, in my experience, will step forward and help them do that. And what they don't know about, we can help them with good career centers. I mean, a story that I sometimes tell when I came to one of the colleges I worked at, the architecture advisor was a faculty member who did research on a Marxist Italian firm that designed theoretical buildings that were never ever built in the world. And it's really great scholarship. It's really cool stuff. But he didn't know about architecture schools or where to go. He knew about this, Marxist collective from the 1960s. You got to give the types of knowledge and experience that the faculty don't have, and they won't fight about that. So I actually think it is doable. But I also think that beyond the career piece, the onus is absolutely on us to demonstrate that over the course of people's lives, that in fact we are turning out engaged citizens, that we are turning out people who have broader interests. And that's really bad, difficult social science because of intervening variables and the longitudinal nature of it. But damn, if we don't try and collect that data and demonstrate that it's really true, then we ought to be pilloried.
Well, that's years ago, it was moving in that direction when Derek Bach and Bill Bowen did Shape of the River.
Absolutely.
They tried to go out there and get that data about what's happening after graduation.
And it worked with the Supreme Court. Okay, so why wouldn't the same type of data, if in fact it achieves what we want it to, work with other cynical populations?
So you've all put on the table the question of both the values that we hold dear and the things that we believe are valued in our society and the way in which those things are in alignment. But we've also all talked all day about changes, both changes we're making. And I think one of the things that makes me more optimistic than pessimistic is that our institutions have changed dramatically, actually, over many, many years, despite what the picture is often out there. Though I often say that it's wrong when we are accused of not being innovative. But it's right what you said. We innovate all the time. We just never stop doing anything. So the core stays very similar, and then we innovate on the edges. And it's very rare for us to take the innovation that does work and move it to the center. Though the panel right before, what Bobby was talking about, I do think that inquiry-based, community-based, engaged learning, to use an overused phrase, is finding its way into the center. It's taking way too long, but it is finding its way into the center. But I also have been thinking, obviously this past week and this past year, we have witnessed extraordinary, it's not new, but it's made more raw in what we have been watching outside of our institutions. And I wanted to ask each of you to think a little bit, if we're thinking 50 years down the road, and you're a college president, again, you want to skate to where the puck is going. What are the big societal issues out there that we're not paying enough attention to? If we think about what's happening, either in the business world or in our civic in our social environment or in policy world, what are the things that we ought to be paying more attention to that our institutions are kind of insulated from and that we're not paying enough attention to?
I'll give a shot at that. I think today we are not paying enough attention to the narcissism that is growing up all around us. I really believe that people have become more and more siloed, narcissistic, believing that that they can have all of it themselves. And yet, at the same time, there are many, 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 as we heard statistics about the divergence of incomes, there are many, many, many who have less and less and less. And I think that teaching interdependence is one of the key things that we could do, and which I think liberal arts do, which is getting people to appreciate that they are not singular. I think as we look at the world, if anything, we are all becoming have more and more reason not to be narcissistic and solo. We are more interdependent every single day than ever before, and being able to teach people how they aren't the center of the universe is something I think we need desperately to pay more attention to.
You know, it's obvious this week, it's been obvious for the last year, but I think fault lines in our society and globally over, you know, race, privilege, gender, you name it, are growing, and the tensions that induces in society and on our campuses that are bellwethers of society become more and more profound. I would certainly say that liberal arts colleges are supposed to be institutions that should be especially good at exploring and delving into the nature of those fault lines, and then being better than much of the rest of the world at finding ways and modeling ways to bridge those divides. And we aren't educating thoughtful, engaged citizens if they're not prepared to understand difference and the impact of privilege and the work that gets done or needs to get done all the time. And that feels an obvious gap from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I wish, I hope, but unfortunately I feel it's more of a wish at the moment, that the kind of classroom described last night, that where there's civil discourse, where there's mutual respect. I mean, if you read the New Yorker article about Oberlin, you worry, you know. I guess I would introduce something that I think in some ways underlies what both Steve and Rick have said, and it's going to sound so trite, but it's digital technology. We talk about deploying technology in the classroom and instructional technology and so forth and so on. I don't think that we have in any way at all in this society come to terms with the way in which this has affected every aspect of our lives, and even more so for our students. So it's going to sound like a sort of a crude statement, but what we learned about this week and what we literally were able to see this week, we would not have seen if we didn't have iPhones, and so forth and so on. There would have been different modes of communication. There would have been different modes of reaction. But this is what we have now. And we have to come to learn how that has changed. I don't want to go to the place where some people are saying it's rewiring the brain, but it's certainly rewiring the society in ways that I don't think we understand, and we ought to take the initiative to try and be more thoughtful and deep about that.
Yeah. So connecting a couple things that have been said, ASCNU just released a report actually on the whole digital learning environment, and tried to move us one step further to, I think, where you're suggesting we might need to go. And one of the things that the authors of that report, well, when the report is titled Open and Integrative, because it wanted to go to some of the things that you were talking about, and that is this larger environment in which things are being pulled apart by technology, which raises the bar for the capacity to integrate. That it's this weird moment we're in where everything's being pulled apart, but what we really need is people who are able to work in that environment and put things back together. So there's a kind of weird So that's what they were trying to get at. But the other thing that I actually liked about this report, I didn't write it, I published it, but I didn't write it, is they talk about how the conversation in higher education around technology has started in the wrong place. It tends to start with the technology, the fancy things that might fix some problem, as opposed to starting from the broader environment and new digital world we live in and our learning goals. And then ask, okay, what does that digital environment allow us to do to get to those goals, rather than how does it just help us save money, or how do we use this bright shiny object because Microsoft created a bright shiny object and we should use it, right? So that's a side point. But I wanted to actually come back to your point, two of your points. I mean, I think two of the things that you were saying are so important, and I think we haven't fully captured it, or we've only captured it at a superficial level. One is your need, and we hear it from employers all the time, for integrative thinkers, right? Integrative problem solvers. And the second is this idea of interdependence as both the environment we're in and an outcome of what we're trying to produce, to push back against the sort of narcissism that you talked about. That language, for those of us in this room, it resonates, because that's how we think about education, as this integrative thing and this thing about interdependence. But there's another whole dialogue going on about higher education that is the dialogue about there will be no colleges left, right? Because the whole experience is in the digital environment, being unbundled, right? So there's a whole bunch of books, you've all probably seen them, Ryan Craig and Jeff Selingo and Kevin Gary and others, who are really challenging whether the learning that everyone needs over time is going to inhere in institutions at all. Do we need institutions at all? I mean, I think they tend to overstate all of this, but at the heart of it is this unbundling phenomenon, which is, it's not something that's in the future, it's here now, right? You can go learn, I can go learn coding online in a completely unbundled way. But of course, I already have an education, I already have a degree, so I'm a different kind of customer than they are talking about. And so my question to you is, what is more important, the pulling apart, the coming together, and where does the institution end up 50 years from now in that kind of unbundled world?
I'll take a shot.
Sure.
Okay. I mean, it's not one or the other, it's both. I mean, I think we get more unbundled than we are, but I don't think we ever get or ever want to be completely unbundled. And I'm not sure that even most of the advocates for the unbundling really argue for that. There are things that we do that are consciously bundled. I mean, the very notion of a residential liberal arts college relies on the value proposition of the bundling of curricular and co-curricular learning. Now, if it doesn't actually happen and we can't demonstrate that it happens, then sure. But I don't think that's the case. You know, cross-disciplinary exploration is a bundling of different forms of inquiry, different forms of knowing, and we think that that's really important. So, you know, the risk is that we start to view what we do as fundamentally disjointed or premised entirely on students or customers' convenience and entirely transactional, and it's not. The product that we offer, the value that we add to the world, is inherently linked in some ways. The challenge is to force ourselves to ask what linkages are really, really important and what linkages are merely historical creatures. It's Carol's point from earlier on. What do you need to forget? Okay, that's how we've done it. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I was going to go to exactly the same place. I don't think it's either or, it's both and.
Yes.
But actually, the example you bring up of yourself, Debra, is perfect, I think, because I don't think we can be in a place anymore where we would say, well, I'm educated, so it doesn't matter,
Yeah,
right? And I think that's a space that we need to move into much more consciously than we have. I completely agree with the earlier speaker who said, our places, our institutions should be a place where you can return for the rest of your life for education. That's terrific for the citizen, for our graduates, but it's also terrific for us because it's an entire new market. We know that the majority of college goers today are not the traditional students, and yet we're not even reaching into that at all, hardly at all. So the partnerships with community colleges, as you said, Carol, and then the partnerships with alumni, those are ways, I think, to sort of make the most of both the bundling, because I do believe, as you believe, and I think Rebecca here is one of our most eloquent writers about that residential experience is important, living in community as a practice for living in the larger communities. That's important, but there are other ways of educating as well, and we need all of them, I think.
I'll just add one tiny code. We should be not just where you come back for education and learning, but if you're going to change your careers 4 times, we should be the first call you make or the first click on your computer for job and career retooling too.
I agree with everything that's been said. The unbundling is going to continue, and there's great value in the integrator. I work every day in nothing more than teams, huge teams. I'm talking 50 people, 100 people, all over the world, and we have to figure out ways to put together into a holistic picture enormous amounts of data that comes from all of the expertise. And so folks that can do that in an extraordinarily high pressure, time-driven environment are extraordinarily valuable. So what do I think is going to happen over the 50 years? I mean, we're going to become, big data is here. Big data is here to stay, and it's going to reside in a lot of people's hands. I mean, it's not going to be dependent on big institutions to access it. But the trouble is, as people stand alone with their big data, if they can't work with the person next door to them, they're really not going to be effective. They are not going to be able to deliver the product, the service, the entire, if you want to be philosophical about it, governmental kind of relationships and institutions that we need. They're not going to be able to do that alone. And so that is going to be critically important, and that's what's going to happen at these institutions. It'll continue.
So I want to also circle back to all throughout the day and last night too, we've been talking not only about the quality of what we do, but who we're educating and the equity questions that we're facing on our campuses and in higher education more generally. And I guess for me, the unbundling conversation makes me most nervous when I think about that, because I do think that several times throughout the day, we've been talking just in session right before about what makes a student who may be a non-traditional student who comes to our campus, what makes them able to stay? And there's tons of research about this. It's not because they had a great Khan Academy experience online. It's the sense of belonging. It's the sense of community. It's the feeling like you're respected and you're valued and you come with an asset-based, all that stuff we talked about before. And I do worry that we are in an environment where there's a kind of, more in the policy world than almost anywhere else, there's a kind of sense we're going to take our most vulnerable students, kind of throw them out into cyberspace and hope they get an education on their own. And I was thinking about this. I want to tell one story about myself. So I went to a very privileged small liberal arts college, which did in fact change my life. But I would say that at least for a big chunk of the time, I did not feel like I belonged there as a working class kid from New Jersey. Williams College was a big culture shift for me. And I did not feel like I belonged there. And I was remembering literally just before when I was listening to Bobby, that there was this experience, and it had to do with my work-study position, which of course helped me get through college. But it also gave me a mentor who was not a faculty member. It was actually a secretary who worked in the business office where I had my job. And in those first years, she would bring me home to her family, which was a working class family like mine. And it was the only time in those first years where I felt like I could exhale or something, and mostly because I was around so much wealth that I just didn't know what I felt uncomfortable. And I had that imposter complex, which I now understand all students have. But at the time, of course, I thought only I had it, right? And at some point, they were going to figure out what? We let her into Williams College? Like, what the hell? Get her out of here. She can't do this work. So those relationships, right? And that would not, I think, have happened except in an environment where you did have some kind of community, and even the secretaries took an interest in their work-study students, which they do at places like that. But it brings me back to this question about work and the relationship between work and learning, which I also feel like is changing faster than we're keeping up with it. And I wonder if we again sort of put on our futurist hats and think 50 years out, what is the relationship going to be between ourselves as workers and ourselves as learners? And what is the implications of that for institutions?
Well, first, as you know, I don't believe at all that we can look out 50 years.
Or just pretend.
Yeah, the great part
It's
is
an
you can,
exercise.
and you're wholly unaccountable.
Right, exactly. Like, let go of it. Exactly. Now, most of us aren't going to be alive.
That's why I love being on this panel. I have to have no data. I can just speculate, and nobody will ever know whether I was right or wrong.
So work.
You know, I think that work and you know, this is probably such an egghead answer. I haven't thought about what you just posed. I think work is going to become more and more learning. You know, because we think about jobs that we would once have thought of as unskilled labor, whether it's being a mechanic or a plumber or whatever it is. I'm sorry, that's got to be fairly skilled labor today because you have to be working with a fairly complex technology. So I think in some ways work is going to move closer to continuous learning.
I think you're right. I think it already has. I see people moving from job to job. I mean, you know, unfortunately, today, just as an example, we have my company, because of some acquisitions we've done, are telling 700 people in central Michigan that they're without jobs. We're telling 2,500 people in the next 3 months that they're without jobs. Okay. Every one of those people has to find something else to do. And lots of them are going to find something else to do other than what they were originally trained to do. That's the reality. And a lot of the people that we're keeping between the institutions that are merging together, a lot of the people we're keeping, we look for best athletes. That's what we say. I'm looking for the best athlete. I'm not looking for the best secretary or the best lawyer or the best specialist at something. I'm looking for the best athlete. I'm looking for the person who plays well with others, thinks critically, all the things that you all say we're good at doing and good at educating. So I think the ability to learn and be able to move from subject to subject well and find something else to do well is essential, and I think it's already happening.
You know, it would be really interesting to know, and I'm not going to ask you to share this data, but of the people that are the best athletes, I'd be fascinated as a trustee of a liberal arts college, what percentage of them are people that really are what we say we produce, and what percentage of them are the people that were trained in a more narrow specialty. And you know, you're not making the decision, you don't have that data, but that's exactly the type of stuff that I wish we could get in the world to make our case.
Yeah, anecdotally, I think they come from places like the kind of folks that you are from. I really do. I believe that's where they come from.
You know, we should probably mention that the converse is true too, and this is one thing we were hearing in the last panel, is that the experiential learning and so forth. So work has become more a part of our learning environments, if you will, and I think that's a good thing. You know, this notion that somehow our colleges are the bubble, and someday you'll go back to the real world, and we were always intended to be the opposite of practical learning. That's not true, as we know if you even think back to what was said yesterday about Harvard. The purpose was to train pastors. It was, you know, vocational training, right? So that those barriers are being broken down sort of from both directions, I think is actually probably a healthy thing.
Okay, I have two more questions, and then I'm going to throw it out to all of you. So start thinking about your question. We talked a lot about what needs to change, what is changing, what's changing out in the world out there. But I want each of you to just say the two things that are enduring values or enduring elements that you hope don't change, even 50 years from now. So we talked a lot. We all have agreed things have to change. Things are changing. What should we really hold on to? Someone earlier in the financial discussion said you need to answer these questions about what is your core work and what are you trying to accomplish, and then a lot of the other questions can be answered. So what are the things that you hope don't change?
I'll go first. Mentorship, number one, and exploration, freedom to explore and see what you can do in the world. You know, a liberal arts education changed dramatically the trajectory of my life for those two reasons. And it was simply because I had a mentor who said there's more out there than you know what exists within 100-mile radius of where you grew up. And that is essential, and I think that is what we really need to hold on to.
I'll add, having students become part of a community that's premised on learning and personal growth. I think being part of that kind of community and linking yourself to it in a way that they will forever feel a deep connection to and a deep affection for, that's something that's rare that we should insist on preserving.
So I feel pretty strongly about my two things. One of them would be what we've mentioned several times here, and that is the big questions. I would disagree. I think I'm disagreeing a little bit with Charlie. I think that our institutions do actually focus quite a bit on what, for example, Bob Connor calls the big questions. Why am I here? What is asked of me? Questions like that about seeking or creating meaning for life. That has to remain core, I think. And the other one is just a variant, I think, on what Eric said. Relationships, recognizing at the heart of everything are the human relationships, not the not the relationship with the laptop or the total narcissism, but the human relationships. I think our colleges actually do bring those to the fore and consider those to be core, but I think we have to always continue to do that.
Yeah, I was thinking earlier the excellent suggestion that Carol made about in effect opening the doors and windows of our institutions to more partnerships, including with community colleges, is actually a way to do that. I mean, a lot of the community colleges I work with are actually extremely good at the mentoring and the relationship stuff, as well as the teaching and learning practices, to be honest. We could learn a lot from them as much as the opposite. So I think I'm going to actually not ask my final question because we have lots of potential great questions in the audience. So questions for anyone on the panel or everyone on the panel? Raise your hands. And I don't know if we have mics. So right back there, and then we have someone in the front next.
Hi. Excuse me. I have kudos, an answer, and a question. So the kudos, first of all, are to our hosts. I just think that all of the panels have really fed into one another really tremendously, and the integration that you were talking about, I think, is evident in what we've been doing for the past however many hours it's been. So it's a great job so far. My answer is the answer to the question of the panel, which is what makes the liberal arts essential for the next 50 years? And I think it's a very simple answer, and that is life. I mean, there's so much that you can say in that, and I'm going to throw in my popular culture reference to the likes of Homer and Billy Joel, as Mr. Spock would say, is life as we know it. I mean, I, as a liberal arts person, can imagine that life might change in such a way that it becomes so bizarre that I wouldn't recognize it. But here's the question. The liberal arts have been around for a long time, as long as the kind of life that we know has existed. So coming back to your point, Eric, earlier, in saying how institutions might not be around in the next 50 years, in 50 years, if you saw liberal arts education, do you think you would recognize it?
I do think I will. First of all, I don't think that it's going to be as dramatic as some project it to be because the pain isn't great enough for the institutions yet. Pain is what will cause people to change and it'll cause institutions to change. And when it gets bad enough, we'll finally really do something about it. But I think what will happen is we will be bigger. The institutions themselves just economically cannot sustain themselves at the enrollment levels that we have. I'm a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. This is what I do for a living. This is the most ripe industry for consolidation on earth. And so you know, it's going to be bigger, but it's going to be consolidated in places like the back office. There will be, my view is there will be centers of excellence. There will be organizations that have depth in particular expertise, but they also have relationships with other institutions that have depth in other kinds of expertise. And we're going to see, you know, what's wrong with having somebody do some things online and a professor go to 4 different institutions, 5 times during the semester to have a personal relationship with them. There's a lot of things like that that need to go on. Back office, you know, consolidation needs to happen in this environment. But I think we'll recognize it, and I think what we'll still recognize is personal interaction. I don't necessarily think it's always going to be happening by virtue of it being residential. I think there's a little bit of back rationalization we all do because we all know that we need those beds filled in order to pay the bills. And so we say, you know, you got to live there to really have the experience. I think there needs to be personal experience. We need to be present with each other. I'm not sure everybody needs to sleep there. But those are kind of my thoughts about what it might look like. But again, I'm not accountable for. Yes.
You know, in some ways, I'm not sure that if 50 years from now, I probably won't be here, right? But I came back. I don't know that I care if I would recognize the institutions as they looked before. But I would be unhappy if I didn't see students learning and having the mentorship, the exploration, the connection to personal growth, the big question, and really exploring and being able to ask and have some place in their learning trajectory to ask those questions. And I don't know if it's all going to be the same place, and I'm not sure I care. If, in fact, more of the students have that. Because right now, a lot of students don't have that, right? I mean, a lot don't. And I think our society and our economy would be more vital if more of them did. So, but where they get it, I don't know that it matters.
That's my greatest fear.
Right, I know.
Is that
that's
you're
true.
seeing.
What I just said should make the liberal arts colleges a little pessimistic.
Yeah, I mean, my greatest fear
That's
is
true.
that you see fault lines in society that lead to 2 very different types of education that are available. That we're great, we're pretty good right now, but we'll get even better at finding spectacular talent wherever it is. And for kids or young people or people mid-career, you know, wherever they are, we'll find them in those really talented people, get this amazingly wonderful, precious residential. Do you need 4 years of residential? That's an interesting debate, okay? I'm not sure you do. But there's some period of residential time that I'm absolutely convinced is necessary and valuable. And so some little set of people get this wonderful, hands-on, slow, intensive, personalized residential, you know, stamp on you and you're in the elite for the rest of your life education. And the mass of society gets an online cheap credentialing, badge collecting, learning experience, okay? And even if that latter thing is well done and tied in with the best of cognitive science and iterative learning, and that's all doable, okay? And that may be a sustainable value proposition economically and a good business that sustains itself. What I worry about is what that does to the social fabric of society. That you have just such wide gulfs that really become unbridgeable. And that's scary to me.
Yeah. Carol? Oh, I'm sorry. Over here and then Carol.
In Wisconsin, so thank you, that is a punchline right now. Especially in Minnesota.
We have state leaders who have explicitly said that they're opposed to supporting higher ed and liberal arts education and increasing access and diversity and in creating people who can change careers easily. And they have explicitly said that one of the reasons they're opposed to that is because they don't like the way those graduates vote. They don't like that those graduates expect to be paid fairly. They don't like that those graduates notice injustice. And some of you have touched on this, but how do we fight back or push back against the general anti-intellectualism in the U.S.?
That's a good question. I don't know that any of us has a good answer on that one.
You know,
Vote them out of office.
well,
What else do you do?
it's like poverty. It has always been with us, right? I mean, Tocqueville spoke about it. It is a part of the fabric of our nation. So I don't know. You know, I've been thinking lately, maybe because we're in a Benedictine environment, you know, I've been asking myself over the past 24 years or so, 24 hours, why can't we do better? You know, if our product, as it were, is so good, why doesn't the world recognize it? And then I think about Christianity, you know, and the internecine fighting and so forth. And, you know, maybe it's too optimistic to think, well, everyone will recognize this and it will all be wonderful. Maybe we just have to keep plugging ahead as best we can, even in an environment of anti-intellectualism. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I wish I did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that this is going to get us very far, but I do think that accepting what you just said, that we still have to bring along allies like business leaders who understand not all the warm and fuzzy stuff we just talked about, like at all, but understand the economy of Wisconsin is in jeopardy if we do not educate more of those people in Wisconsin at higher levels. And really sort of just go straight back at them and say, here's the data, people. You know, Lumina is churning out reports to prove that, forgetting liberal education, that you need a robust public higher education system, public and private higher education system, or your economy is in jeopardy. I mean, the data is so clear on that. So in some ways, I feel like in Wisconsin, in some ways, we've already lost the more philosophical discussion that we just had, but we're in no position to lose the economic argument, which is so clear. So I still think there's room there to literally just keep pushing back. I don't know if it will win.
Well, you know, don't lose sight of the fact that I think what we do gets better all the time. I think the quality of a liberal arts degree right now is better than it was 20 years ago, as the quality of a great research university degree.
Right,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And when we look, it's not just a national look. So when you look around the globe, you see more and more places in the Pacific Rim starting to look at what liberal arts colleges can do. And as you see that happening, smart policymakers and smart citizens, and there are plenty of them out there, you know, are noticing. Right. So fundamentally, I'm optimistic about that. There's always an anti-intellectual strand in society. But we keep doing what we do, and we keep demonstrating with the data why it matters. We win because society wins by that.
Okay.
Thank you. I have a curricular question, which I think people often give the liberal arts a kind of false stability. The liberal arts, in fact, have changed in terms of their content. And so my question is, are there either areas of study or capacities of mind that are really important for the student of the 21st century that we're not giving enough attention to? And I suppose I could ask as a kind of follow-up, what would you give up in order to get there?
Well, I haven't answered that, but I'll let others. Where is there a whole area that we're just not?
I'm going to sound like a business person. STEM is real. Okay, we need people who are quantitatively literate. People need to understand data. And I think every single person graduating from a liberal arts school has to be able to go ahead and manage data. They have to be able to understand it, and they should know how, you know, we shouldn't have to describe the kind of plotting charts that we had up here to this room because everybody should know it, and every student should know it when they graduate. To me, that's what I see as the gap that sometimes from liberal arts perspective comes. All the other things apply, but ability to use data in pragmatic ways is something that I think we have a gap in.
I'll agree with you, but I will grab my inner social scientist humanist and say that understanding the power of data, but also understanding its limits and how it can be misused, is critical.
Agree.
I would add creativity. I think that the notion of being creative is a skill that can be developed over time. And in the same way that a scientist who develops, Kuhn's paradigm-busting ideas, it's exactly the same skill set that it takes to create a symphony when someone didn't have one before, or create a new novel. And forcing students to develop their own skills, no matter what they're majoring in, about learning to be creative, I think is critical.
I'm going to follow up on that for just a minute. I wrote a little essay about the liberal arts, past, present, and future. And one of the interesting things that I noticed, and I want to follow it up more, was that when I looked at, and this was looking at the testimonials of alumni who were very successful, trying to kind of tease out what they felt had been meaningful and valuable in their undergraduate careers. And as I looked at the characteristics, I began to see that they mapped very well onto the characteristics that researchers in creativity have identified. And that's a real gold mine for us, I think, because I agree with you completely. Creativity is going to be needed in every field. And I guess it was kind of a surprise to me, actually, to see this. I probably can't call it data, but to see this pattern begin to emerge, that what our graduates say made a difference is almost identical to what researchers on creativity say fosters creativity.
Carol, I think that I would say this is not something that I think is brand new, but it's something that we began getting better at and then we stalled. And so a personal story, the very first set of projects that I worked on at AAC&U was in the mid-90s, and it was in the first phase of diversifying the curriculum. And it was, discipline by discipline, including a big project I did with the National Science Foundation about women's studies and science, and about sort of really understanding the diversity issues that in our history and in our current circumstance, discipline by discipline and in interdisciplinary ways. We made a lot of progress in that, a huge amount of progress, but I think we stalled. Otherwise, I wouldn't be getting phone calls from reporters saying, okay, so the students are protesting at X institution because they want to diversify the curriculum. They want a diversity requirement. Is that a new idea? So I wrote a book in the late 90s, Diversity in General Education Curriculum, which is all about diversity requirements. What makes a good one? What makes it last? We got like half full, a third full of that glass, but we have more work. Obviously, we have more work to do on that front. So, yeah, Zakia.
Hi. So I have two questions. One is kind of something to respond, kind of comment to that I would love your reactions on. So first, the idea of online, I think I initially assumed that it is kind of the kind of cheapening of an in-person experience, but the more and more I actually interact online with people myself and become more kind of technologically whatever, I realize I have more conversations with people that I wouldn't have otherwise on Twitter and Facebook. And I was kind of changed my mind about its potential to have deep, engaging, personal discussions in small groups when I saw Minerva, which I didn't love at first, but then not saying anything about their business model, but just talking about the format. Yep. It's actually very much like a liberal arts experience, and you see people and it's video and yep. You're interacting with them and it's very small. It's smaller than any college class I've ever been in. And the professor has more cues and is able to call on people and has more data about how long someone's been silent. So I actually think, I'm just kind of wondering about your reactions. I think sometimes we may be too quick to dismiss online as not having the same capabilities as we currently have in person. And I just wonder if it really is the case that it will always be more personal in person than it is online. The second one is about adult students and whether I've seen more and more kind of through my work at Lumina about colleges engaging adult students, not just for sometimes yes for vocational, but infusing in that a liberal arts kind of way of thinking. And as we have more people that have some college and no degree because they never graduated because of our college completion crisis, you have more adults that actually
Tons of them out there.
need that. And I'm wondering what their connection is to this, if anything.
So I'll take a stab at both of those. That example of Minerva, I think, is one of the ones that they talk about in this new publication that we did, which tries to sort of get beyond the flip assumption that I think Charlie was right this morning to say you can have 5 people in a classroom and it can be really unengaged even though they're in the same room, right? And you can have a discussion online that can be really engaged. So that dichotomy has got to go away. I agree with you on that. I think the returning adult student thing is fascinating, and we haven't begun to mine the possible more integrative hybrid models. I've done a little bit of work with the University of Wisconsin Flex program, and there they are doing a lot of sort of returning adult, sort of completion kinds of programs, very vocational. But they're also working with their 2-year college system to try to figure out, can we do a competency-based program for returning adults that's all basically the gen ed curriculum, the transfer curriculum. They're not there yet. They've got a lot of design work they still need to do, but there's huge potential there.
I want to just mention one specific one, just as an example. Alma College is partnering with a local health system to do an RN to BSN program. Okay, and because why? Because the health system wants more bachelor's degreed nurses, and we have the ability to go ahead and deliver that. But we have to change the mindset, which is we have to deliver that in places where people can't necessarily live with us. Okay, so they're reasonably close in proximity, so they come to campus, but we have to understand they aren't going to take up dorm space, and that was a big change for us. But it also is going to help with top line growth. Okay, it's going to help with revenue growth, and it's going to infuse them with a lot of liberal arts, values that we want to have out there anyway. So we think that's a win-win.
I think online changes, it's fluid, and it gets better and better, and so I never underestimate it, but I'm skeptical that online gets you at any point in the foreseeable future Mark Hopkins on one end of the log and you on the other. And if it gets you that, I really don't think it gets you Mark Hopkins walking around the quad with you after class is over, or Mark Hopkins coming into your dorm. Well, that sounds creepy, but okay. With a beard, right? Yeah, very bad. Okay. James Garfield and you as classmates. I don't know. I think there is something. Sparks fly in ways when people look each other in the eye face to face, and when you walk across the campus and you encounter somebody who you had an awkward exchange with, and you got to figure out how to make that work better. And I don't think online gets you that yet, okay, or for the foreseeable future. And I think I would be prepared to roll the dice and bet that there are educational benefits and wonderful things that come from being forced in close proximity with people who are really different from you and having to navigate that. And I don't think that goes away.
Of course, they have some of that in the Minerva thing as well, right? I mean, it's the model sort of hybrid institution. Okay, over there.
Oh, great, thank you. This sort of follows on what you just said, but also the earlier reference to online and to the difference that technology has made in our culture. I don't know how many of you, this looks like a really adult room, so I don't know how many of you have been around preschoolers lately, but all my grandchildren live within 1.5 miles of me. This is no accident. They get a lot of free service. And they range in age from now 5 to 17. I have watched the transition from television to computers to iPads, which the little ones, 3, 4 years old, they're on the iPad, to phones. The older children only use phones. On the phones, they only get the kind of information that they have sought. So my 17-year-old grandson, who happens to be a very strong Bernie supporter, we have a lot of conversations, he gets the news about Bernie's last victory before I even wake him up if he stayed overnight at my house. I don't know that we're prepared for the kind of addictive mode that I see technology exercising on my grandchildren, and B, the narrowness of vision as people only read online and therefore only choose what they want to read. And I'll just say as a last thing, and I'm sure there's a question in here somewhere, the Time magazine about 3 months ago had on its cover porn. And it was a magazine about what 26-year-old young men are saying about their addiction to pornography really online and how they wish they could get over it. Now I don't know about rewiring brains, but we've had a psychological shift in this country with the generation that's going to be coming to these institutions. Are we prepared for this? And what's your response?
Thoughts, either up here or there's probably people in the room who have dealt with some of this.
Well,
Yeah, maybe from the room.
I think some of it is probably not just reflective of young people, but there's plenty of folks my age that are addicted to the technology. I mean, I carry 2 phones. My expectation of my senior management is that I'm available. I'm available 24 hours a day, and that's it. So there is a certain element by which there's an element of reality to this that you have to deal with. But on the other hand, I think that's again part of the challenge for us is that how do we deliver, and I think we can, a personalized, not narcissistic, not singular, selected, I get to only hear the things I want to hear. I really think we need to be, we don't need to apologize for the fact that we make people read certain things, and apologize that if we offend them a little bit because they don't necessarily agree with it. So I think that's a good thing that we can do as colleges, and we have to go ahead and embrace some of the things that are good about it, which is, I'll tell you, you can get answers really fast, okay? And the world expects answers really fast. So there are some benefits to it.
So there may be people in the room who actually know more on the research about the cognitive changes and all of that. And I know there's a big, but my own sense is that there is there's like a rebalancing going on generationally, and there is a kind of, each generation that comes along sort of is starting to figure it out like on their own. So I have nieces and nephews who are across that spectrum, and I have to say, like, the 10-year-old, she's not addicted to her phone at all. Like she has somehow managed, she uses it, she can respond to a text, but she does not feel at all like she needs to respond right away. And she doesn't use it when she can be in a group of people. I don't know. I feel like she's getting that balance better. And I don't know whether it's just we're all learning to do it better or they're learning to do it better than you and I are, because I'm in the middle of the night on my email all the time. So.
I guess I want to say one thing about this. It does look disturbing from the outside. You see these patterns that are very different from what you're familiar with. But of course, one of the great advantages of liberal arts education is some sense of historical context, right? So I do want to say that Socrates in the Phaedo is tremendously concerned about this new technology of writing, right? And it's going to destroy human relationships. And most specifically, one thing there are several characteristics that he notes, but one that he notes is that one way that writing will destroy, society as we know it, or life as we know it, maybe, Jerry, is that people will forget how to memorize things. He was not wrong. Right? So, but I think it's very important, if you study the history of technology, every new communication technology like this has introduced tremendous anxiety and angst. And what I like to think about that is it's not about the device. Once again, it's about the relationships human to human. Do you trust each other? Can you communicate with each other? It's not a new problem.
We have time for maybe one final question. Oh, excellent.
I'd like to ask about the future of the faculty. And I have at least two questions buried in there. One, will we be able to recruit them? Georgia, you mentioned reflecting on Christianity in the last 24 hours or so, and there's been a lot of research about what happened to the clergy, the Christian clergy profession, when the profession lost status, the salaries went down, it was no longer cool to be a clergy person, and you were moving around. And I would suggest that maybe we could say the same thing is happening for faculty. It's not as high status. The salaries are bottoming out. Maybe at the top schools they aren't, but around the country they're not doing as well. Are we going to be able to recruit them? Because so much of what education is about is the faculty. And second, how do you think about their work? You know, when I think about high impact practices and project-based learning and creativity and those kinds of things, we've trained our faculty to be content experts. I mean, they were the height of the 20th century content experts, and now we want them to process learning. So
It's very different. I agree.
It's a great question. I mean, you know, if the role of the scholar as a valued expert were really to change, that potentially is the earthquake that changes all this. I don't think so yet. I mean, there's so much information that's out there, and you can get it all, but synthesizing it and really valuing it and knowing what's crappy information and what's good information, those decisions of scholarly acumen, I don't think go away. In terms of being able to recruit, wow, I'm going to take a real fast shot at another sector of higher education that isn't that well represented here today. As long as major research universities keep clinging to their outdated business model that depends on replicating large graduate programs and prestige based on PhDs, it's going to be a buyer's market. Okay, and you know, they're being stupid, most of them, about that, but there should be, if we're worried about how many liberal arts colleges there should be a lot fewer PhD programs and a lot great research universities, candidly.
I agree. It's a great question, Rebecca. On the second part, the first part disturbs me more than it disturbs Steve. I don't know. Because status matters. It does make a difference in what's attractive or not. And I think about the salaries at the institution where I was just serving as president, and they're sort of execrably low. But going to the second question, I think that that is taking care of itself. I think that the younger generation of faculty they're not abandoning being content experts, but as I see them and as I read their dossiers, they are much more engaged and creative and interested in pedagogy and how they're going to change things up and how they're going to reach their students in different ways. So I'm not so worried about that. I think that's just happening kind of naturally.
Yeah, I agree with you, Georgia. I see that too, although I also see, and when I go out and work on campuses, that there's a disconnect between them being ahead of where the sort of structures of our institutions are, how we pay them, how we figure out their time constraints. And so that's a structural change that we all just this is where we really do just have to do it differently, and we have to stop doing it in older ways. So there's that disconnect there for sure. But I agree with you. It's not because the faculty don't want to or see the need to really engage with students in different ways and new ways, and to engage with knowledge and knowledge creation and inquiry in different ways. I think they get that, even if we're not helping them as much as we should be. Get it right. So I think we are out of time, and I just want to ask all of you to thank our panelists.